Hey, algebra. So, taking a look at the do now for today. Hopefully, you saw this in class already, but based on the table below, which part of the table is the inputs? Question number one, and which part of the table is the output? That's question number two. Go ahead and hit pause while you come up with an answer. I'll wait. All right. So, the input is always the x portion. In this case, it's the top row. You could list out each one of those numbers if you wanted them to totally be correct. And the output, it's always going to be the f of x. Sometimes we call it a y, sometimes we call it f of x. We're learning about functions now, so we're going to use the function notation f of x. You could totally list out each of the individual numbers in that row. That's also correct. All right, so the lesson for today is about tables, using function notation, evaluating function notation using tables, and solving. And so we have these two learning targets. One word different. You'll be able to evaluate using a table. Evaluate means put a number in for x, and you'll be able to solve for x using a table. Okay, so we've seen tables before. We've been studying functions for a while. Tables have shown up several times over the last couple of weeks. Um, so it's not entirely new, but I do want to bring back to our attention, here's what we've seen so far about function notation, what the different parts of function notation mean. So up here at the top, I got function notation f of x equals something, equals a. I just put a for an answer. Usually that is not going to be an a. So the f, that's just our label. It tells us one, it's a function, and two, it gives it a name. So if we had multiple functions, we could call one like a of x, b of x, c of x, d of x, e of x, f of x. Typically, we just go with f because function starts with f. Inside the parentheses, there's that x, that is the input. Input always refers to x, whether you're looking at the function notation or some other part of the question makes it clear this is input. We know that input always refers to x. And in the directions, the word evaluate is what is going to be the clue that we're talking about an input or an x value. So we saw that um, in the learning target. It says to evaluate. The output is the answer that we get over here after the equal sign. Output is referred to as the y coordinate. Like if we're looking at a graph, it'll be a y coordinate. If we're looking at an equation or a table, it might be labeled as a y, but more likely it will be labeled as f of x, since we are studying function notation. And in the directions, the word that's going to tell us we're talking about an output is the word solve. Okay, so in the learning targets, those are these two words that showed up. Evaluate, that's referring to an input, and whoops, that's too much. Solve, that's referring to an output. Okay, so there's our little mini lesson. Let's jump to some examples. First up, we've got a table that we just saw in the do now, and we're asked two different things. First, we're asked to evaluate. Okay, evaluate, that's the direction word that means input. And also in the parentheses is where that number two shows up. That is our second hint that we're talking about an input. I'll make that circle better so that I'm not covering stuff. Okay. So since we have an input, what we're going to do is look in the, so remember input means X. So we're going to look in the X row until we find the number 2. That's our input. We're trying to find what output is matched with it. So for an input of 2, the output is 70. And in part 2, the directions change words. Now it says solve. That's our first hint that we're dealing with an output. And after the equal sign is where that number shows up. The number after the equal sign is the output. Outputs are the y coordinate, or in this case, labeled with function notation, it is f of x. So I'm going to go to the f of x row and try to find where 7 is. It's right here. And I am asked what input gives me an output of 7. 6 is the x value or the input. So I'm going to put a 6 right here. Okay, we've done problems like that before, so it's not a new thing. So let's take a look at a different problem. This time I'm given a table. It says, what is the equation to represent the data set? Data set is referring to the table. We're given multiple choice options of 4 different equations. Okay, well, we're going to learn later on in the coming weeks, we'll learn how to get equations for ourselves, but we have not learned that yet. So we could use some of those same strategies if we knew them to say, oh, for this table, the equation would have to be blah, blah, blah. And then we would know the equation, we'd pick the right one, but haven't learned that yet. So our best option is to do some checking. Maybe guess and check is what we call it. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna do, I don't want yellow. I'm trying to change my highlighter color. So I'm gonna take this first equation, y equals x plus 3, and I'm going to color code my work here. So plus 3, I'm gonna make myself a little table to keep track of my work. And I'm going to check one input at a time to see if I use the input of 1 in this equation, what output will it give me? I'm hoping that it's going to match, but that's what I'm trying to check. Okay, so if I put 1 into the x spot here, 1 plus 3 is 4. That gives me an output of 4. So far, that's a match. Yay! But probably every single one of these equations is going to have one of the inputs that works to give me one of the outputs. I am not looking for one input to be matched correctly with one of the outputs. I need all 4 inputs to be matched with all 4 outputs. So just because I got one match, that's not enough to convince me this is the right answer yet. So I'm going to keep checking. If I use 2 as the next input, if I put 2 in here, is the x, 2 plus 3 is 5. That is not a match. So I can check the others, but even if they did work, this equation is not correct because it does not work for all of the inputs, matching them to all of the outputs. Okay, let's check the next equation. I'll do this one in blue. Okay, so y equals 3x plus 1. I am going to wait. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna get rid of this work I had from before. I need to see my table. And okay, so I'm gonna do this in blue. Y equals 3x plus 1. Keep track of my work in a table. First input is 1. Right there is 1. So I'm gonna put the 1 into the x place and use that as the input. So this means 3 multiplied by x. And in this case, I'm changing x to 1. So 3 times 1, that's 3, plus 1 is 4. Okay, input of 1, output of 4. This one matches just like the last one, but I need to keep checking to make sure this is going to work for all of the inputs to give me all of those outputs. So if I use 2 as the input, 3 multiplied by 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, also a match. If I put 3 as the input, 3 multiplied by 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, that's also a match. And if I use the last one of 4, 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. All of those matched. Yay! And so that means this is the correct equation. If I were to check the other two bottom equations, 3x plus 13, it might have worked for one of the inputs to give me one of the outputs. It might not have, I don't know. But once I find an answer that does work for all 4 inputs and outputs, that's the answer. So now at this point, I don't have to check the rest. All right. So here's another equation. This is question number 6 out of the assignment. This table also gives me an equation. It says here's the x number and the y is not given to me. It just says here's the equation you could use to find the y coordinate. Here are my inputs. Those are all given to me. And for the outputs, I need to find them. The directions say, given the table, find 5 solutions to the equation. Right? So solutions, remember, is that word. Well, solutions is related to the word solve. The solutions are the outputs. So I need to find the outputs that go with these inputs. Okay, so in the table, the outputs are listed as A, B, C, D, E. Those are like placeholders. And what I need to do is find out what numbers those would be so that I can enter them into the answer blanks underneath. So let's do the first one. It's an input of -2. Y equals -2. And instead of an X, I'm going to use that input of -2. I'll write that in a second. Yeah, so I'm using the input of -2 and the whole equation with -2 multiplied by the input, subtract 1. Okay, here we go. -2 multiplied by -2, that's going to be a negative times a negative is positive 4, and then subtract 1 is 3. Oops, 3. Okay, so the input of -2, output of 3. And the directions over there say that I am supposed to enter my answer as an ordered pair. If I can highlight it. So ordered pair, and an ordered pair is the math vocabulary term which refers to coordinates, like where we use parentheses. So ordered pair, and it keeps changing colors on me. Oh, no, it's not even writing. Ordered pair. So it's going to be inside parentheses, the X and then the Y. In this case, the equation does have a Y, so I can say X, Y. That's what we normally think of for ordered pairs. If the problem had listed the outputs with function notation, it would not change anything that I type. So an ordered pair could mean X comma F of X. It doesn't change what I type. Here's what I'm going to type. I need to go into this answer blank, and I'm going to put parentheses. Input was -2. The output that I just got was 3. Close the parentheses again. All right. So for each of the input values, I'm going to put it into the equation, just like I did here. Evaluate what is the output value, and then enter the input and the output in parentheses as an ordered pair, X first, Y second. Okay. Example number, question 7 as an example. So same type of setup. I have a table. The inputs, some of the inputs are given to me, but the X's are inputs. Y is described with this equation, and some of the outputs are provided, and some of them I need to find. Okay, let's just focus on one thing at a time. So if I'm told what the input is, if I have the X value, then I'm going to take that X value, the input, and use it as the X in this equation. So I'm going to put 0 as the input, -2 multiplied by 0, that's 0, and then subtract 1, it's going to be -1. Okay, these directions say the word ordered pair. It says find 4 ordered pair solutions, but which is kind of confusing. I do not need to enter my answer as an ordered pair because I'm not typing it like somewhere else. That's not what the directions ask me to do. That's the reason. So I'm just going to enter the output of -1 into that answer blank. And let's look at the next row. So this time I have been given an output of -3. I need to find what input gave it to me. So I'm going to take the output of -3, put it into the Y spot in that equation. Now I'm going to have to work backwards to find out what input did I start from to get an output of -3. Okay, so we remember from a few minutes ago that output has the words in the direction solve. And that word doesn't show up as solve in the directions. Solution obviously is a related word to solve. But the point I want to make here is that if I have the output and I need to work backwards to find the input, that process is called solving. Okay, whether the directions say it or not, it's called solving. And when we are solving, we do the order that we do the work is described by SADMEG. We can remember that because SADMEG starts with an S, just like solve starts with an S. Okay. So I need to undo the math that has been done on this input of x in order to give me an answer of -3. So I got to work backwards. So I'm going to do subtracting or adding first. I need to undo whatever was in the problem so that I can work my way backwards to the start. So instead of subtracting 1, I need to add 1 to both sides of the equal sign so this stays balanced. -3 plus 1 is -2. That -2x will stay here. Subtracting 1 and adding 1, those are opposite operations, so that cancels out. And then scroll. Stay scrolled. Then in order to get rid of this -2, which is being multiplied onto the x, I need to divide by -2. So multiplying by -2 and dividing by -2, those are opposite operations, so they're going to cancel each other out. And I will have just x and an equal sign. And over here, -2 divide by, whoops, I forgot to write another negative sign in there. I have to do the exact same thing on both sides. So over here, I divided by -2, and here I need to divide by -2, even though I forgot to write that down. -2 divided by -2 is +1. Whoops, all right. So +1 is the input right there.